In recent weeks and months, Baldur's Gate 3 started to pop up on the radar of a lot of people. It feels like entering into 2023, we kind of weren't really talking about Baldur's Gate 3 as we were like Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, Diablo 4, Final Fantasy 16, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Starfield, Stalker 2, Hogwarts Legacy, and so on and so forth. This year has been jam-packed with big releases, and it feels like Baldur's Gate 3 kind of has been left out of that conversation until now, or at least the last couple of weeks, because a couple of weeks ago we talked about how a lot of AAA game developers pushed back on the notion that this could be setting a new standard, and some of them just pointing attention at the fact that this game has a ton of content, has tons of choices and consequences. It has a massive scope and scale. I think it has like 170 hours worth of cinematics, millions of lines of dialogue, and ultimately it's kind of like a meaty love letter to RPG fans. And that's why it was kind of weird that we saw developers from Blizzard, Obsidian, Insomniac, Bethesda, CDPR, BioWare, Criterion, and so on and so forth, all speaking out on the fact that this should be considered abnormal. It should be an anomaly and not set the new standard for RPGs. And I feel that's weird, especially when we look at the fact that the last couple of years, the biggest releases that have come about set a new standard. Elden Ring, Breath of the Wild, The Witcher 3 a couple of years before that. And really there are too many games to count. Disco Elysium is probably another great example to bring up in this conversation. But the uproar surrounding this game, especially from Western game developers, has just been weird. But the thing about Baldur's Gate 3 that kind of is taking me by surprise is the fact that I actually do think that this is maybe going to take that spot as Game of the Year. I thought that this was a lock for Tears of the Kingdom. I no longer think that that is the case, especially the more I play this game, and also the reviews that are coming in, because right now Baldur's Gate 3, at least on PC, the Metacritic score is a 97 out of 100 based off of 16 critic reviews. We'll see how that changes in the future, but it's only going up right now. The user score is also a 9.3 out of 10. I believe that Tears of the Kingdom has a similar score, around a 96 out of 100 from critics, but right now Baldur's Gate 3 is the highest reviewed game of the year. That is just a shocker, since there wasn't a lot of people talking about this game entering into the year, at least in terms of the mainstream audiences, I should say, because obviously a lot of PC gamers were getting excited about this, especially from their time with the early access. But hardcore gamer giving the game a 100, Baldur's Gate 3 had extremely high expectations set for it, and it has exceeded them. Not only is it a contender for Game of the Year in a year with many exciting titles, but it is a continued evolution of what CRPGs are capable of achieving. IGN Spain giving it a 100, with Baldur's Gate 3, Larian Studio redefines the meaning of open world and creates a masterpiece that elevates the classic RPG to a new level that will take years to surpass. Gfinity, with interconnected stories, brilliant writing, fascinating characters, and living, breathing world full of choices and consequences, Baldur's Gate 3 sets the standard for today's RPGs. You owe it to yourself to experience it, and that sentiment is what we're seeing from critics and users alike. Just a couple of days ago, Baldur's Gate 3 peaked at over 800,000 concurrent players on Steam, and currently it has around 500,000 to 600,000. It's shocking how many people are playing this game, and it shows that CRPGs aren't capped at a certain amount. I think previously Larian's Divinity Original Sin 2 peaked at 100,000 players. A lot of people were waiting for a meaty RPG like this, and that shows kind of the impact of word of mouth. All of that positivity that we saw online has drawn people to diving into this game, and that's why so many people are excited for the future of Larian as a developer. But right now, we did see a humble approach coming from the director of publishing at Larian to these massive player accounts right now, saying obviously these kinds of stats fill us with a profound joy. They're huge milestones, but I think the most important thing is knowing that the game is being enjoyed. It's giving a lot of people a good time, and that's the whole point. If we accomplish that, we did our job. And it's not just PC in which the hype is at. We also see that it is the #1 best-selling pre-order on PSN in the United States right now. So a lot of people are just extremely excited about this game. But again, the conversation still is in regards to does this game set a new standard? I think it does, but some of the other developers in this industry in recent weeks have called it Rockstar level nonsense for scope. We also had a game developer saying this is not a new baseline for RPGs, this is an anomaly, adding that trying to reach the same bar without the same experience and advantages could kill an entire group of studios. And that is certainly fair for, say, the indie developers, the studios with under 50 to 100 developers. But when you look at this AAA games industry, the scale, the scope, I just don't see why they can't make a game like Baldur's Gate 3, especially with the fact that they have that experience, they have that time, they have that funding. Now, we also saw an Insomniac Games design manager urging others not to use a singular game to set expectations for everyone developing RPGs because it isn't useful and instead foolhardy. And again, I would just ask, why is this being made for Baldur's Gate 3? Why is this being said for this game specifically, and why has this not been said with millions of other games that are always compared? I mean, hell, every game review is always compared to another game in terms of what it brought to the table. Now, we did see Obsidian Entertainment design director Josh Sawyer, previously worked on Pentiment, and years before that, Fallout New Vegas, saying, "The conditions under which BG3 was made are atypical. This is no way a slight against the game or the people working on it who are clearly passionate and talented. Having the foundation set and the funding to build things on your own terms is invaluable." And I think the thing that he's trying to hit home on is the fact that, yeah, there is that corporate authority at the top, the executives that have authority over what's going to be made. And these developers, they don't have, even though they have this unlimited funding, they have to go by what the executives want. And I feel like that is one major advantage that Larian does have, and it's that they have an executive, Sven Vink, the CEO, the boss, who clearly has a care for creativity over profitability. You see his stance against microtransactions. You see his stance against being acquired by a company like Microsoft, who is considering them at one point. He says he doesn't want to have a monolithic power ruling over them and making decisions that may not be best for the game. And we also saw a Diablo 4 developer making remarks about this current ordeal and this game setting a new standard, saying that if we're going to look at this as a new benchmark, we would need to then focus on creating conditions just like with Tears of the Kingdom, but people too often only look at the fruits of labor and not the labor itself, same as it ever was, I guess. Same deal with people wondering why there are so few artists painting like Renaissance masters. We also had a couple of former and current lead developers at CDPR saying the BG3 is so good, AAA developers are furious, narrative in capital G gamer spaces is so ridiculous, everyone I know is playing it and loving it. This now Riot Games developer saying doctors hate her, discover this weird trick for vibes. I just would point out that there are a lot of other developers that have taken it serious. They interpreted it in a different way. That's why there was pushback from other developers. We talked about that in my prior video about this subject. So just because it's being interpreted one way as this is just some ridiculous, nonsensical story, it's not being treated that way by other developers in this industry, which is why we're having this discussion and why now Sven Vink did, of course, respond to this situation. And this is coming from a recent podcast episode of Friends Per Second. He recalled a time when Assassin's Creed came out and everyone was talking about how all other studios would be doomed because nobody had the resources that Ubisoft had to make a game like this. But the panic was unjustified. We still have plenty of teams and plenty of titles of different scopes and genres, while the Assassin's Creed franchise is still thriving in its own niche. Although I do think Assassin's Creed has adopted some formulas from other games, such as The Witcher 3. Speaking of people seeing Baldur's Gate 3 as the new standard for RPGs, Vink said standards change continuously, so it's not as if there's something that is a standard. I don't think that there are things people should be worried about. We really just try to make our game, so we were surprised when we saw that there was so much commotion about it, and it's just a weird thing. People haven't even seen the game, so it's hard to say that it's a standard. It offers a lot, that's for sure, and it offers what we would like to see in an RPG. So I hope a lot of people will make games like ours, because that's what I and the rest of my team want to play, but there are a lot of other stuff that we want to play. And again, when you look at Baldur's Gate 3, it isn't necessarily innovative or innovating on what we've seen, it's just giving players what they want, which is choices, consequences, freedom, kind of like things that you would expect in RPGs, and especially on this scale, we just haven't seen it. And I think, again, that's more of an indictment from this industry and how modern gaming has kind of failed gamers in many regards. Now, Sven Vink continues, everybody played Disco Elysium. That was made by a much smaller team, and it was great and fantastic game, so that's a standard now. But I'm a big fan of Into the Breach. That's a standard for me, so you've got a whole bunch of standards out there. The only game that exists in the universe for my youngest son is Minecraft. That's a standard for him. And then he said, for a player's point of view, I would come to expect that the platform holders at least set the standards, because that's how it usually has been in the past. They always say, here's the guiding light. People, this is possible now, so go and do stuff with it. That always been how I looked at platforms. And I think he's totally correct with that. I mean, you can look at Horizon Horizon Forbidden West. I can't stop seeing people on my timeline on Twitter talking about how it has breathtaking graphics. It's the most innovative game in terms of how it looks, and I guess, yeah, I agree. In that regard, it has set the standard for what a PlayStation 5 or the current gen game should look like, or could look like, I should say, because I don't think every game should go with that art direction. But that is a standard. God of War Ragnarok in many ways in terms of its gameplay. Red Dead Redemption in terms of its cutscenes, the storytelling. That is another example. Every couple of years we have games that come about and they set a standard in some regard. That is exactly what Sven Vink is saying here, and I don't think everybody looks at one specific game as a standard. People look at aspects of games as a standard. They don't look at it as the whole. I guess that's the best way I can put it. Now, Sven Vink added that Baldur's Gate 3 is a very specific type of game, and Larian has been on this path for over 20 years. So it is logical that the studio has both the expertise and resources to fulfill its vision. However, Vink still doesn't buy into this new standard discourse, saying that other developers should focus on making their own games and reaching the right audience for them.
I saw the discourse, obviously, but I didn't really understand why it was a discourse. Right. I don't think there's such a thing as a game that says, oh, this is the standard, and everybody has to hold itself to it, because tomorrow somebody else will come up with something new and cool, and that'll be now the new standard. And these standards change so rapidly that there's no standard.
Now, he did continue his thoughts in another interview. This time was with PC Gamer, and he had a lot more to add about this current situation and all of the uproar about Baldur's Gate 3 and it setting a new standard. Asked about the debate, Vink agreed that Baldur's Gate 3 could only come about under certain circumstances. Obviously, yeah, if you're a 50-man studio or a 10-man studio, you shouldn't try to make a game like Baldur's Gate 3. But he questioned the reality of the standards being argued over. The problem I have is with the use of the word standards. This is video games. Standards just die every day. Things get reinvented. New things appear all the time. To the extent that standards do exist, Vink found it strange that developers from larger studios would be concerned about boundary pushing, pointing specifically to the new creative possibilities that technological advancements can enable. As for RPGs in particular, he noted that it doesn't take an enormous game like Baldur's Gate 3 to change the genre. And again, I've hit home on this multiple times throughout this video, but Red Dead Redemption 2, you look at the volumetric clouds, that set a new standard in that regard. The ecosystem in which there's an actual working, living food chain, the AI in that game it's because of the technological advancements. That is a new standard. It feels so dumb that we're having this conversation while we should be celebrating this game. And developers should be looking at this for inspiration, and there are some developers that have. We talked about it. It's not like this is a universal thing that all game developers in the West are saying that they're panicking over this, because they're not. We saw one game developer from GSC Game World saying that, let's spin this a bit more. Should Mortal Kombat games not be considered as a standard for fighting games only because Midway NetherRealm has been developing those games for about 30 years and have all the expertise and resources they have today? Should recent and upcoming GTA games be treated the same way when it comes to open world action games, or maybe Witcher 3, which already became an RPG standard in many ways? Trying to manage expectations of players in this situation is pointless. It would be really close to trying to control what people like or not. If players will love something in BG3, they would definitely want to have a similar experience in future RPGs they play, and other developers should be inspired by that. So yeah, some game developers understand this, some seem to be worrying about it, and I just don't understand it. But Vink did finish up his thoughts saying, Disco Elysium changed standards on the fly with a smaller team, right? That's a completely different standard now. There are so many games that change standards to the point that there are no standards, was my thing. But I think you should always strive to evolve, especially in this medium, which is different than any other media in the sense that technological evolution has always been a big part of it. There's always been innovation, but at the same time, it doesn't require massive technological evolution to do something crazy and cool and different than what anybody else has done before. And I think that's exactly what Baldur's Gate 3 delivers on. It isn't necessarily this technological masterpiece in any regard. It's just giving players more of what they want, which is freedom, choices, consequences, customization, a massive story to jump into, a fun open world, tons of loot, tons of different builds that you can make. It's an RPG dream. That's the way that I've been experiencing, and that's the way I think about it. And then additionally, this is a complete product. There is no microtransactions. It is extremely polished. It's just something that you don't see often from this industry, and which especially this year, we've just been waiting to see how games launch to know if it's safe to play. Larian is already talking about the future, and it isn't another massive game like this. They're actually going to be going smaller next time, and I actually feel like that's kind of like the best direction that they could take. I don't think it always has to be bigger and better. Sometimes going smaller is best. That's why I do respect that. Look at From Software. They aren't necessarily going on Elden Ring 2 or the next Dark Souls game. They're going to go make another Armored Core game, and they're not making it like a Souls-like. They're sticking to the DNA of that franchise because that's the game that they want to make. But in regards to Larian, they have suggested that its next game could be smaller than Baldur's Gate 3. We actually saw some remarks in a Bloomberg article. Vink mentioned that he doesn't know what's next for the studio, but he did express a desire to work on multiple games, as well as something smaller. He certainly doesn't want to spend another 6 years developing a single game. And again, this takes a long time. Remember, Baldur's Gate 3, Larian, they massively changed over the last couple of years. This was a studio that only had around 50 to 100 developers. Now they're over 400. But I'm very excited for the future of Larian. Kind of were like the underdogs the last couple of years, and now they're at the top of this industry. They have set a new standard in many regards, and I hope that it inspires other game developers in the West to make better experiences. And I think gamers should expect better from these studios. Obviously, I don't think every game has to be Baldur's Gate 3 level, but I think that there are certain things that this developer did, especially with like the freedom of the open world and the choices and consequences. When a game has that RPG label next to it, you should expect that. And that's why I do think modern gaming needs to do better for gaming audiences. And Sven Vink seems like one of the few gaming CEOs that understands that creativity leads to massive sales like this. And their success hopefully will lead other gaming executives to understand that you got to take a chance every once in a while. But anyway, there's a lot of discussion right now in regards to Baldur's Gate 3, the whole standard debate. But what do you make of all of this? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value, and consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.